In 1940, Britain had a problem. How do you kill enemy soldiers when you can't be seen doing it? The answer was so creative, it sounds like a joke, but it's true. They used rats, dead rats, filled with explosives, and the German secret police fell for it every single time. This is classified war files, stories the archives kept secret for decades. Today, we open those secrets. The year is 1940. Britain is alone. The United States hasn't entered the war. The Soviet Union isn't fighting yet. France has fallen. Every nation in Europe is controlled by Germany. And Britain has no way to fight back directly. That's the context. Winston Churchill is the Prime Minister. He's desperate. He tells his military advisors, "Incendiary Europe." He doesn't mean it literally. Well, actually he does. He wants sabotage, disruption, secret operations, anything to damage the Nazi war machine. But here's the problem. How do you send explosives and weapons across occupied Europe when you have no soldiers there? When Nazi checkpoints guard every road? When the Gestapo, the secret police, shoot anyone they catch spying? The answer came from a man named Colin Gubbins. He ran something called the Special Operations Executive, the SOE. It was Britain's secret service for sabotage and guerrilla warfare, and under his command, a division was created. A division so secret, so creative, so bizarre, that historians didn't believe the stories until files were declassified 60 years later. That division had a name, Department Q, and their job was to invent weapons. Weapons so disguised, so ordinary looking, that nobody would suspect them. The question became, what if we could send explosives as garbage, as something nobody would ever inspect? That question led to something nobody would have predicted. Rats. Explosive rats. Let's start with who these people were. Department Q was a secret division of the SOE. It was located in a place called Whitchurch, near London. The scientists and engineers who worked there had one job: invent weapons that looked like ordinary objects. They were essentially a weapons laboratory. Except instead of building tanks and guns, they were building lies, physical lies. Objects that looked innocent but were designed to kill. Think of it this way. Imagine a laboratory from a science fiction movie, but it's real. And instead of inventing technology to help humanity, you're inventing creative ways to kill enemy soldiers. And here's the thing. These weapons couldn't fail. There was no second chance. If a bomb didn't work, the agent carrying it got caught. And if an agent got caught by the Gestapo, they were tortured. And if they were tortured, they talked. And if they talked, the entire operation failed. So every invention from Department Q was life or death. For the agents, for the mission, for Britain itself. What kind of weapons did they invent? Everything. Pens that fired bullets, salt packets with poison inside, cigarettes that exploded, metal coins that detonated when you tried to spend them, matches that were actually explosives, chocolate bars with machine guns inside, even cat bodies filled with explosives and microfilm. But the one weapon that became the most famous or infamous was the rat. Why a rat? Because the Germans burned coal. Coal was essential. Every military barracks needed heat. Every factory needed fuel. And coal came in shipments, massive shipments, mountains of coal dust and chunks. Now think about this. If you're a German soldier working at a coal depot, are you going to inspect every single piece of coal? Are you going to pick up coal dust and check it? No. You just shovel it, you load it, you burn it. And a dead rat in a pile of coal? It's not suspicious. Rats die in coal shipments all the time. They get into the storage, they get crushed, they get buried. It's just part of the process. So Department Q realized, we can hide explosives in a rat. We can send that rat in a coal shipment, and when it gets burned, the explosives detonate. It's like a Trojan horse, but instead of wooden, it's furry. Instead of soldiers inside, it's RDX, a military explosive. The idea was brilliant. It was also completely insane, but that was the whole point of Department Q. They specialized in ideas so crazy that the enemy would never expect them. So how exactly do you build an explosive rat? What's the actual process? First, you need a rat, not just any rat. It has to be recent, fresh. You can't use a rat that's been dead for weeks because it'll decompose. The smell will give it away. The texture will be wrong. So Department Q got rats from zoological gardens, from laboratories, even from dead cats sometimes. They were looking for medium-sized animals, big enough to carry a decent amount of explosives, small enough to not draw attention. Step 2, you open the animal. You carefully remove the internal organs, the stomach, the intestines, the liver, the lungs, all of it comes out. You're left with just the skin and bones. It's gruesome, but it's necessary. Step 3, you prepare the explosive. The material was called RDX. It's a military-grade explosive, very stable, doesn't detonate from impact or friction. You need a detonator to set it off, and you prepare about 200 grams of it. That's roughly 7 ounces. Enough to destroy a coal storage facility. Not enough to level a building. Step 4, you pack the explosive inside the rat's body. You wrap it in waterproof plastic so it doesn't deteriorate. You place it carefully inside the empty cavity where the organs used to be. Step 5, you close the rat. You sew the skin shut, or you use clay to seal it. You make it look like a normal dead rat. Maybe it smells a little, maybe it looks slightly off, but in a coal depot, nobody's going to examine it closely. And finally, step 6, the detonator. This is the clever part. You can't use a simple fuse because then someone might find it. You can't use a timer because you don't know when the rat will be burned. So they used a detonator that activated with heat. When the rat was burned in a coal furnace, the temperature would rise. And at a specific temperature, maybe 150 degrees Fahrenheit, the detonator would trigger. The explosive would detonate, and the coal depot would explode from the inside. It was engineering at its most creative and at its most deadly. The whole process took about an hour per rat. 1 hour to convert a dead animal into a weapon of war. But producing one rat wasn't the goal. The goal was mass production. Department Q set up an assembly line. Yes, you heard that right. An assembly line for explosive rats. Dozens of workers, civilians, British citizens who had taken an oath of secrecy. They were told nothing except their specific job. One person was responsible for obtaining rats. Another was responsible for opening them. Another was responsible for placing explosives. Another was responsible for sealing them. Nobody knew the full picture. That was intentional. It was called compartmentalization. If one worker talked, they could only reveal a small piece of the operation. By 1943, Department Q was producing dozens of explosive rats per week, hundreds per month. Some reports suggest they produced 500 rats in total. Others say 300. The exact number is still classified. But here's the question. How do you send these rats across the English Channel? How do you get them to France, to Belgium, to Holland? How do you transport bombs shaped like dead animals across Nazi-occupied territory? That's where logistics came in. The rats were packed in refrigerated crates. They were labeled with false documents, zoological specimens, laboratory cargo, medical delivery, false paperwork, false identities. Just like the rats themselves, the crates were loaded onto British transport aircraft, planes that flew at night, planes that avoided radar. They flew into occupied France. They were parachuted down to SOE agents on the ground. The agents, British spies working in France, would receive the crates. They'd verify the contents, and then they'd distribute the rats. They'd sneak into German coal depots at night. They'd open the security fences. They'd place the rats in the piles of coal, and then they'd disappear. The process was incredibly risky. If a British agent was caught with an explosive rat, they'd be executed, not just as a spy, but as a saboteur using unconventional weapons. The Gestapo had special procedures for agents caught with disguised weapons, but the agents did it anyway, because they understood the stakes, because they believed in the mission. So what happened when the rats actually detonated? The confirmed results are remarkable. Between 1943 and 1944, at least 3 major coal depots were destroyed by explosive rats. The Germans confirmed this in their own military reports. We know this because those reports were captured and declassified after the war. One depot in northern France was destroyed completely. 50 tons of coal lost. 12 German soldiers were killed. 3 more were severely injured. Another depot in Belgium experienced a massive fire. It spread to nearby ammunition storage. The explosion was so large that German command thought it was a bombing raid. They scrambled fighter planes. They called for reinforcements. They thought they were under aerial attack. But there was no airplane, no bombs, no pilots, just a dead rat filled with explosives, burning in a coal furnace. The damage was significant, but the psychological impact was even more important. You see, the Germans didn't understand what was happening. They found rat bodies, some intact, some destroyed, some just fragments. They found evidence of explosives, but how did a dead animal become a weapon? The Gestapo launched investigations. They brought in bomb experts. They tried to reverse engineer what happened. They issued reports. The enemy is using biological weapons. The rats have been weaponized. All coal shipments must be inspected for suspicious rodent remains. And that created a massive problem for German logistics. Every coal shipment now had to be inspected. Soldiers had to go through piles of coal looking for dead rats. It was incredibly time-consuming. It reduced efficiency. It required extra personnel. Germany was already stretched thin on manpower. Every soldier checking coal for rats was a soldier not fighting on the front lines. Every hour spent inspecting was an hour lost in production. So the rats achieved something remarkable. They didn't destroy Germany, but they created fear. They created doubt. They made the Germans distrust their own supply lines. And that was the real victory. But here's the truth about the program. It wasn't perfect. Approximately 40% of the rats dispatched never detonated. Some had faulty detonators. Some were found before they were burned. Some simply failed due to technical problems. The Germans caught some of the rats intact. They sent them to their own bomb experts. The experts examined them. They confirmed, yes, this is definitely a bomb. This is definitely a weapon. The enemy is weaponizing animals, and the Germans made a decision. They issued orders. All coal shipments must be thoroughly inspected. All suspicious animal remains must be reported. And if a soldier found a rat, they were to report it to military command. This made the rat program less effective over time. By late 1944, the detonation rate had dropped to below 20%. The Germans were too vigilant. They were inspecting too carefully. But the program wasn't just about the rats. Department Q was inventing dozens of other weapons. There were explosive devices disguised as coal, blocks of coal made from a mixture of explosive material and coal dust. They looked identical to real coal, but they were bombs. There were shells designed to look like they'd been fired but hadn't. Agents would place them in areas where German soldiers patrolled. When a soldier picked one up, it detonated. There were booby-trapped items from dead German soldiers, helmets filled with explosives, canteens filled with poison, personal items designed to kill anyone who touched them. There were camouflaged explosives, lumps of dirt that were actually bombed, rocks that were actually bombed, tree branches that were actually bombs, and there were chemical weapons, poison pencils, poison cigarettes, poison chocolate bars, designed to be left in areas where German officers would find them. The entire philosophy was the same. Make the ordinary deadly. Make the enemy afraid of everything. Create such paranoia that the enemy wastes resources trying to stay safe. And it worked. Partially. Not perfectly, but it worked. By 1944, Germany had to increase security protocols for all supply shipments. They had to retrain soldiers. They had to publish pamphlets warning troops, be aware of booby traps. Do not pick up unfamiliar items. Report all suspicious objects to command. It was psychological warfare, and it was incredibly effective. But here's the question. Why did the program stop? The official reason was that it became ineffective. The Germans learned to inspect more carefully. The detonation rate dropped. The Germans were anticipating the traps. They were finding the weapons before they could be used. But there was another reason, a darker reason. Britain was worried about reprisals. The German government was seriously considering, executing British prisoners of war in retaliation for the booby-trapping program. The International Red Cross warned Britain, if you continue this program, Germany will claim the right to execute your captured soldiers. It was a violation of the Geneva Convention. Technically, though both sides violated it constantly during the war. But the British government decided it wasn't worth the risk. They didn't want German reprisals against British POWs, so they ordered the program to stop. The last confirmed deployment of explosive rats was in October 1944. After that, Department Q shifted focus to other weapons. The rat program was terminated, and then it was forgotten completely. It was classified. It was buried in archives. It was lost to history. For 60 years, nobody knew. The soldiers who participated were sworn to secrecy. The engineers who built the rats never spoke about it. The agents who deployed them took the secret to their graves. It wasn't until 1996 that files were declassified. Historians were searching through National Archives records, and they found it. Thousands of pages, declassified documents, reports, blueprints, photographs of the actual rats, and the historical community was shocked. This couldn't be real. This had to be some kind of joke, some kind of fictional account that got filed with the real documents. But it was real. It was all completely real. Universities began investigating. Historians verified the sources. The National Archives confirmed, yes, this program existed. Yes, the British military did build explosive rats. Yes, they did deploy them against Germany. The story made headlines in history journals. The Hidden War, Britain's secret weapons program. Declassified documents reveal explosive rat program. How creativity defeated conventional logic in World War II. And suddenly, a program that had been secret for 60 years became famous or infamous, depending on your perspective. So what was the actual impact of the program? How much did it really matter? In terms of raw numbers, the damage was minimal. A few dozen German soldiers killed, a few coal depots destroyed, a few tons of supplies lost. In the context of a global war involving hundreds of millions of people, it was statistically insignificant, but in terms of strategic impact, it was remarkable. The program proved something fundamental. Unconventional weapons work. Creativity works. Surprise works. Making the enemy afraid works. It forced Germany to dedicate resources to defense. Resources that could have been used for offense. It created paranoia. It made soldiers distrust their own supplies. It spread fear through the military. And it showed the world, or at least the Allied world, that you don't need massive armies to damage an enemy. You need creativity, imagination, willingness to try the impossible. After the war, military strategists studied the program. Intelligence agencies studied it. The CIA examined declassified documents. They learned lessons about unconventional warfare, about sabotage, about psychological operations, and those lessons influenced military strategy for decades. The concept of weapons designed to create fear rather than death became a standard part of modern warfare. So the explosive rats didn't win the war, but they contributed to winning the war. They proved a principle that has become central to modern military thinking. The mind is the battleground. If you can make the enemy afraid, if you can make them doubt, if you can make them waste resources on defense, you've already won half the war. That was the legacy of the explosive rats. But there's one more thing worth mentioning, something that makes this story even more remarkable. Nobody knows exactly how many German soldiers died from the explosive rat program. The numbers in declassified documents vary, anywhere from 12 to 50. The exact figure has never been confirmed, and that uncertainty is part of the point. The Germans never understood what was killing them. Was it sabotage? Was it an accident? Was it an attack? They didn't know, and that not knowing created more fear than if they'd known exactly what they were facing. A soldier who knows there's a specific threat can prepare for it. But a soldier who doesn't know what form the threat will take, a rat, a coal pile, a helmet, a cigarette, that soldier lives in constant fear. And that fear, that psychological burden, was worth more to the British military than any amount of explosives could have been. So when you think about World War II, when you think about how Britain managed to hold out against Nazi Germany in 1940 and 1941, when you think about the victory that eventually came, remember this: it wasn't just generals and battleships. It wasn't just courage and determination. It was also creativity. It was also engineering. It was also the willingness to try something so completely absurd that your enemy would never see it coming. It was exploding rats. The history books tell one version. The archives tell another. This was Classified War Files. Subscribe for the next declassified file. And leave a comment. What was the most surprising thing you learned today? Was it the explosive rats? Was it the Department Q laboratory? Was it something else entirely? And here's what we're uncovering next. The SOE's silent killers. How Britain trained assassins for World War II. How they taught agents to kill without making a sound, without leaving evidence, without anyone knowing who did it. It's a story of murder, of espionage, of the darkest corners of military intelligence. We'll uncover it in the next video, so subscribe, hit the notification bell, and don't miss the next declassified file. Classified War Files. Every story, every war, declassified.